The fierce winds swept across the Montana Territory plains, threatening to drown out Katherine Owens' desperate cries as her horse, a skittish Arabian mare, reared violently at the edge of the swollen Yellowstone River. It was May 1878, and the unusually heavy spring rains had transformed the typically passable ford into a roaring death trap of churning white water and hidden currents. Katherine clutched the reins tighter as panic seized her chest. At 22, she had traveled alone from Boston to Helena to claim her late uncle's mercantile store, convinced she could manage independently despite warnings about the untamed frontier. Now, as the gelding's hooves slipped on the muddy riverbank, she realized how foolishly confident she'd been. "Steady, girl," she whispered, her elegant riding habit already soaked from the spray. "Just a few more steps." The river had looked manageable from a distance, a necessary crossing on her final day's journey to Helena. Local settlers had assured her that with care, the ford was still passable despite the recent rains. But they hadn't accounted for the sudden cloudburst upstream that had swollen the waters to treacherous levels in just hours. The mare whinnied in terror as a floating branch struck her flank. Katherine felt the world tilt as the animal reared again, hooves pawing the air. Time seemed to slow as she lost her precarious grip on the saddle, her body arcing backward into the rushing water. The shock of cold stole her breath as the current immediately seized her, dragging her downstream in its powerful grip. Her sodden skirts twisted around her legs like anchors pulling her under. Katherine fought desperately, managing to break the surface once, twice, gasping for precious air before the river pulled her down again. Through water-blurred vision, she saw a rider urging his horse into the churning waters. Strong, sun-bronzed arms reached for her as consciousness began to fade at the edges of her vision. The last thing Katherine registered was being hauled against a solid chest as darkness claimed her. Owen Sutherland had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs when he heard the scream. At 31, he'd spent over a decade in the Montana Territory after leaving his family's struggling Pennsylvania farm. Years of breaking horses, driving cattle, and surviving the harsh realities of frontier life had hardened his body and sharpened his instincts. Those same instincts now propelled him toward the river without hesitation. His experienced eye took in the situation instantly: the panicked horse, the woman's failing struggle against the current. His stallion, Diablo, responded immediately to his urging, plunging into the torrent without hesitation. As Owen secured the unconscious woman across his lap, he spoke soothingly to Diablo. "Steady, boy, nice and easy back to shore." The powerful stallion fought against the current, finding footing on the riverbed. When they finally reached the bank, Owen carefully laid the woman on dry ground. Her face was pale beneath streaks of river mud, her chestnut hair plastered to her skull. For a terrifying moment he feared he'd been too late. "Madam, can you hear me?" He pressed gentle fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. Katherine's body suddenly convulsed as she coughed up river water, her eyes flying open in panic. Owen quickly turned her onto her side, supporting her as she expelled the water from her lungs. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." Katherine gasped, her vision swimming as she tried to focus on the face hovering above her. A stranger broad-shouldered with a weathered face and concerned hazel eyes partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. "My horse," she managed between coughs. "Ran off up the bank," Owen replied, glancing toward where the mare had scrambled to safety. "She seems unharmed, just spooked." He hesitated. "You nearly drowned, madam. That crossing's dangerous even for locals after these rains." Katherine struggled to sit up, mortified as she realized the state of her clothing. Her once fashionable riding habit clung transparently to her form, her modesty preserved only by her corset and chemise beneath. Owen noticed her discomfort and immediately shrugged out of his leather duster, draping it around her shoulders. "Name's Owen Sutherland, madam. I've got a cabin about 2 miles from here. We need to get you warm and dry before night falls." Katherine pulled the coat tighter, grateful for both its warmth and coverage. "Katherine Owens. I was traveling to Helena to another fit of coughing interrupted her. Explanations can wait, Owen said firmly, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. Right now, we need to get you somewhere warm. Can you ride? Katherine nodded uncertainly. Her entire body ached and her lungs burned with each breath, but she understood the dangers of exposure. Already, the late afternoon sun was dipping toward the distant mountains, and the spring air held a distinct chill. Owen whistled sharply, and her Arabian mare cautiously approached, still nervous but responding to the commanding sound. I'll catch your horse, but you'll ride with me. Diablo's more steady. Before she could protest, Owen had effortlessly lifted her onto his stallion's back, then swung up behind her. The unexpected intimacy of being seated between his arms, her back against his chest, sent a flush of embarrassment through Katherine. In Boston, such proximity would be scandalously improper. Here, it seemed her rescuer viewed it as simple practicality. As Owen urged Diablo forward, leading Katherine's mare by the reins, she was acutely aware of his steady breathing and the solid strength of his body. Despite her exhaustion and discomfort, she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. His face was sun-darkened and lean, with a straight nose and a strong jawline darkened by several days' stubble. Not conventionally handsome by Boston standards, but there was something compelling in his weathered features and quiet confidence. "You're from back east," he stated rather than asked as they rode. Katherine nodded. "Boston. My uncle Jeremiah owned a mercantile in Helena. He passed away 2 months ago and left it to me." Owen's silence told her what he thought of a city woman trying to run a frontier business alone. It was the same skepticism she'd faced from the moment she'd announced her intentions to her horrified parents. "I'm perfectly capable of managing a business, Mr. Sutherland," she said stiffly. "I helped my father with his accounting firm for years." "Didn't say otherwise, Miss Owens," Owen replied evenly, "but running a mercantile in Helena is a far cry from keeping books in Boston. The territory has its own rules. Rules I'm willing to learn," Katherine insisted, then winced as her body protested the movement. Owen just nodded, and they continued in silence as the terrain changed from riverside meadows to pine-covered foothills. By the time a small log cabin came into view in a protected valley, Katherine was fighting to stay conscious, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Owen's cabin was sturdy if sparse, a single main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and a small cooking area. A door at the back presumably led to a lean-to or storage area. Everything was surprisingly clean and orderly, not at all what Katherine had expected from a bachelor's dwelling in the wilderness. Once inside, Owen efficiently built up the banked fire while Katherine huddled near it, still wrapped in his coat. The warmth began to penetrate her chilled body, bringing with it the painful prickling of returning circulation. "You need dry clothes," Owen stated practically, rummaging through a wooden trunk. He produced a faded flannel shirt and a pair of well-worn canvas trousers. "These will be too big, but they're clean. I'll step outside while you change." Katherine clutched the offered clothing, hesitating. "I couldn't possibly. You can't stay in those wet things, Miss Owens," Owen interrupted firmly. "There's no one for miles to be scandalized by you wearing men's clothing, and it's that or risk pneumonia." Without waiting for further argument, he stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Katherine stood frozen for a moment before pragmatism overcame propriety. Her fingers, still numb from cold, fumbled with the buttons of her sodden jacket and the laces of her corset. Finally, free of the restrictive garments, she pulled on Owen's shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, and rolled up the trousers until she could walk without tripping. She had just finished spreading her wet clothing near the fire when Owen knocked. "Decent?" "Yes," Katherine called, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. Owen entered carrying an armful of kindling. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable, then busied himself adding wood to the fire. "I'll make some coffee and heat up some stew. You need something hot inside you." Katherine sat gingerly on one of the wooden chairs, watching as Owen moved efficiently around the small space. His movements were economical, nothing wasted. He seemed completely at ease in this primitive environment so far from civilization. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the throbbing pain in her limbs. "Built this place 8 years ago," Owen replied, hanging a pot over the fire. "Worked as a ranch hand for the Triple R for a few years before that. Now I break horses for several ranches and do some hunting and trapping in the winters, all alone." Katherine couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "Diablo and a good dog are better company than most people I've known. Wolf's out hunting right now, but he'll be back by nightfall. Wolf, half cattle dog, smartest animal I've ever known." As if summoned by his name, a scratch at the door preceded the entrance of a large, gray mottled dog with keen amber eyes. The animal paused at the sight of Katherine, ears pricked forward. "Wolf, this is Miss Owens. She's a guest," Owen said calmly. The dog approached Katherine cautiously, sniffing her outstretched hand before sitting beside her, apparently accepting her presence. "He doesn't usually take to strangers," Owen commented, sounding mildly surprised as he poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "I've always had a way with animals," Katherine said, cautiously stroking Wolf's thick fur. "My father thought it most unladylike how I was forever bringing home strays." Owen handed her a steaming cup. "Careful, it's strong." Katherine took a sip and barely suppressed a grimace at the bitter brew. Owen noticed and actually chuckled, the sound warming the space between them. "Not like your Boston tea parties, I expect," he said, a hint of amusement softening his features. "It's bracing," Katherine managed, taking another determined sip. They ate in companionable silence, the hot stew reviving Katherine's strength and spirits. Outside, darkness had fallen, and rain began to patter against the cabin's small windows. "You can take the bed," Owen said as he cleared away their dishes. "I'll sleep by the fire." Katherine started to protest, then realized the impropriety of their situation, alone in a cabin with a strange man wearing his clothing. Her mother would faint at the mere thought. Yet for all his rough exterior, Owen Sutherland had shown nothing but respect and concern for her welfare. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. I fear I would have drowned if not for your intervention." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "But they didn't, you did." Katherine met his eyes steadily. "I owe you my life, Mr. Sutherland." "Owen," he corrected. "Out here formalities seem pretty foolish." "Owen," Katherine repeated softly. "Then you must call me Katherine." Something shifted in his expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly hidden as he nodded and turned away. "You should rest, Katherine. We can head to Helena tomorrow if the rain lets up." That night, lying in Owen's narrow bed with Wolf curled protectively on the floor nearby, Katherine listened to the rain on the roof and the occasional pop of the fire. Across the room, Owen's breathing had deepened into sleep. She studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, one arm flung above his head. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston, refined gentlemen in tailored suits who discussed politics and literature at her father's dinner parties. Owen Sutherland was a product of this wild country, as rugged and uncompromising as the mountains themselves. Yet there was a quiet dignity in him, an inherent decency that had nothing to do with social graces. Katherine closed her eyes, wondering why the thought of reaching Helena tomorrow left her with such unexpected reluctance. Morning brought clearing skies and stiff muscles. Katherine awoke to find the cabin empty, though the fire had been freshly stoked and coffee was warming on the hearth. Her clothes, now dry if somewhat wrinkled, had been folded neatly and placed on a chair beside the bed. She dressed quickly, grateful to be back in her own garments despite their bedraggled state. Outside, she found Owen by the small creek that ran behind the cabin, washing up in the cold water. He had shaved, she noticed, and changed into a clean shirt. Wolf sat nearby, alert to every movement in the surrounding forest. "Good morning," Katherine called, feeling oddly shy. Owen straightened, water droplets clinging to his hair. "Sleep well, better than I expected," she admitted. Though I fear I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, if you could point me toward Helena. Owen frowned slightly. It's a full day's ride and you've been through an ordeal. Are you sure you're ready? I've delayed long enough, Katherine insisted, though her body protested at the thought of another day in the saddle. My solicitor is expecting me, and I need to take possession of the mercantile before someone else tries to claim it. Someone else, Owen's brow furrowed. Katherine hesitated, then explained, my uncle had a partner, a Mr. Garrett, who believed the store should have been left to him. He's been trying to convince the solicitor that I'm unfit to take ownership, that a woman can't possibly run such an establishment. Owen's expression darkened. Harrison Garrett, you know him? Everyone around Helena knows Garrett, Owen said grimly. He's not a man to cross. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air settled in Katherine's stomach. What do you mean? Owen seemed to consider his words carefully. Garrett has influence in town. Money buys friends, especially in places like Helena where fortunes are made and lost on a handshake. He paused. Your uncle was his death unexpected, Katherine stared at him. It was ruled an accident, a fall down the stairs at night. Her voice faltered. Are you suggesting it wasn't? I'm suggesting caution, Owen replied. Jeremiah Owens was well respected, if his store is profitable enough for Garrett to contest your inheritance. He didn't need to finish the thought. Katherine's mind raced. The solicitor's letters had mentioned Garrett's persistent claims, but had assured her that her uncle's will was legally binding. Now, with Owen's warning, she wondered what she might be walking into. I can't simply abandon my inheritance because of vague suspicions, she said finally. No, Owen agreed, but you might consider not arriving alone. He hesitated, then added, I've business in Helena myself, could delay it a few days, but I was heading there regardless. Katherine studied him, wondering at his offer. Was it mere kindness or something more? Either way, the thought of facing Harrison Garrett with Owen Sutherland beside her was decidedly more comfortable than doing so alone. I would appreciate the company, she admitted. They set out an hour later, Katherine's mare seeming to have recovered from the previous day's fright. Wolf loped alongside them as they followed a trail that wound through pine forests and across open meadows brilliant with spring wildflowers. The beauty of the landscape took Katherine's breath away, so different from Boston's manicured parks and formal gardens. It's magnificent, she murmured, gazing at the distant mountains still capped with snow. Owen nodded. Most beautiful country I've ever seen. Changes you living out here. How so? He considered the question seriously. Strips away pretenses. Out here, a man is judged by what he can do, not who his family is or how he speaks. He glanced at her. Might be hard for someone used to city comforts. You think I can't adapt, Katherine said, a touch of defiance in her tone. I think it takes more than determination to survive here, Owen replied honestly. Takes knowledge, skills, willingness to learn from those who came before, including the native peoples, Katherine asked. Her question wasn't idle. She had read extensively about the territories before leaving Boston, disturbed by accounts of the government's treatment of indigenous tribes. Surprise flickered across Owen's face. Yes, though that's not a popular view in most settlements. Neither is a woman running her own business, Katherine pointed out. I'm accustomed to unpopularity. That drew a genuine smile from Owen, transforming his stern features. Fair point. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat the provisions. Owen had packed jerky, hard bread, and dried apples. Katherine sat on a sun-warmed rock, massaging her sore legs surreptitiously while Owen checked the horse's hooves for stones. We should reach Helena by nightfall, he said, straightening. There's a decent hotel on Last Chance Gulch, not fancy but clean. And tomorrow I'll meet with Mr. Brooks, the solicitor, Katherine said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Will you? Would you accompany me? Owen hesitated, then nodded. Garrett respects few people, but he knows better than to cross me. Why? Katherine asked, curious about the history between the two men. A shadow passed over Owen's face. We had a disagreement some years back about his treatment of a Blackfoot family trying to trade in town. He doesn't take correction well. He left it at that, but Katherine sensed there was more to the story. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they approached the settlement. Signs of mining operations began to appear: denuded hillsides, crude sluices, and occasional clusters of ramshackle cabins. Helena had been founded after a gold strike, Katherine knew, though her uncle's letters had described how the town was evolving beyond its mining camp origins. As they crested a final ridge, Helena spread before them in the valley below a sprawling collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with houses and businesses climbing the surrounding hillsides. Church spires rose alongside saloon signs, and the streets teemed with activity even as the sun began to set. "Last Chance Gulch," Owen said, gesturing to the main thoroughfare. "Your uncle's store is near the north end, across from the assayer's office." Katherine felt a surge of anticipation and apprehension. Somewhere in that bustling town was her future, a future she had crossed a continent to claim. She glanced at Owen, finding unexpected reassurance in his solid presence beside her. "Ready?" he asked, sensing her hesitation. Katherine straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Ready." Helena was a cacophony of sounds, smells, and sights after the peaceful journey through the wilderness. Wagons rattled past on the muddy streets, horses and mules stood tied at hitching posts, and pedestrians of all descriptions navigated the wooden boardwalks. Katherine noticed many curious glances directed their way as Owen led her toward a two-story clapboard building with Helena Hotel painted on its facade. "I'll see to the horses if you want to secure rooms," Owen said as he helped her dismount. Inside, the hotel lobby was simply furnished but clean, with a polished wooden counter and a small sitting area with leather chairs. The clerk, a middle-aged man with spectacles, looked up as Katherine entered. "Good evening, madam. Need a room?" "2 rooms, please," Katherine said firmly, placing coins on the counter. "I'm Katherine Owens, Jeremiah Owens' niece from Boston. I believe Mr. Brooks, the solicitor, may have mentioned my arrival." The clerk's expression changed instantly. "Miss Owens." "Yes, indeed, Mr. Brooks said to expect you days ago. We were getting concerned, what with the spring floods and all." "I had a slight delay crossing the Yellowstone," Katherine said, unwilling to elaborate on her near drowning. "Is Mr. Brooks available this evening, or should I call on him tomorrow? His office closes at 5, but he takes supper here most nights. Should be in the dining room now if you're wanting to speak with him." The clerk hesitated. "Might mention, Miss Owens, Mr. Garrett's been asking after you daily. Seems mighty interested in your arrival." Katherine felt a chill at the mention of Garrett but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for the information. We'll take those rooms now." "We." The clerk peered past her just as Owen entered, Wolf at his heels. His eyes widened slightly. "Evening, Sutherland. Didn't expect to see you in town this soon." "Winters," Owen acknowledged with a nod. "Miss Owens had some trouble on the trail. Thought I'd see her safely to Helena." The clerk's gaze moved between them speculatively. "I see. Well, we've rooms available. Will the dog be staying inside?" "Wolf stays with me," Owen said, his tone brooking no argument. Rooms secured, Katherine took a moment to freshen up before heading to the dining room. She did her best with her travel-worn appearance, washing her face and hands and pinning her hair into a semblance of order. Her riding habit, though clean, showed the effects of her river misadventure and long journey. "It will have to do," she murmured to her reflection in the small mirror. She was here for business, not to impress society. Owen was waiting in the hallway, his own appearance somewhat improved. He changed into a clean shirt and brushed his coat, though his boots still bore the dust of the trail. Wolf sat obediently at his side, earning wary glances from hotel staff. "Brooks is at a corner table," Owen said quietly, "and Garrett's with him." Katherine's stomach tightened. "I see. Well, there's no avoiding it, I suppose." The dining room was half full, mostly men in various states of frontier dress, with a few women in plain, practical clothing. Conversation quieted as Katherine and Owen entered, curious gazes following them as they made their way to the corner table. Lester Brooks proved to be a thin, nervous man with a wispy gray beard and ink-stained fingers. Beside him sat a florid-faced individual in an expensive tailored suit. Harrison Garrett, Katherine presumed. Both men rose as they approached, Brooks with a relieved expression and Garrett with calculating eyes. Miss Owens. "We were beginning to fear some misfortune had befallen you," Brooks exclaimed, taking her gloved hand briefly. "Your telegram said to expect you 3 days ago." "I encountered some difficulties crossing the Yellowstone," Katherine explained. "Fortunately, Mr. Sutherland came to my assistance." Garrett's gaze shifted to Owen, his jovial expression hardening. "Sutherland, didn't know you were acquainted with Miss Owens." "Recent acquaintance," Owen said calmly, pulling out a chair for Katherine before seating himself. "Miss Owens, I'm Harrison Garrett, your late uncle's business partner," Garrett said, extending his hand with an unctuous smile. "Jeremiah spoke of you often." Katherine doubted that very much, as her uncle's letters had barely mentioned Garrett except to express frustration with the man's business practices. Still, she accepted his handshake briefly. "How interesting, Mr. Garrett." "My uncle's letters mentioned only that he had a silent investor, not a partner." Garrett's smile tightened. "Perhaps in the legal sense, but Jeremiah and I had an understanding about the future of the business." "An understanding not reflected in his will," Brooks interjected with surprising firmness. "As I've explained repeatedly, Mr. Garrett, Jeremiah Owens left explicit instructions. The mercantile passes to his niece with no encumbrances or conditions." Katherine felt a surge of gratitude toward the solicitor. Perhaps she had judged his nervous demeanor too quickly. "And I'm here to honor my uncle's wishes," she said clearly. "I intend to take possession of the store tomorrow and continue its operation." "A woman alone running a frontier business," Garrett shook his head with exaggerated concern. "My dear Miss Owens, surely you don't understand the challenges involved. Helena is not Boston. The mercantile serves miners, trappers, ranchers, rough men with rough ways." "Men who need supplies, regardless of who sells them," Katherine countered. "My uncle built a reputation for fair prices and quality goods. I intend to maintain that reputation." "Noble sentiments," Garrett said dismissively. "But sentiment won't protect you when a drunken miner decides to take liberties or when suppliers refuse to honor contracts with a woman." "Miss Owens won't be facing those challenges alone," Owen spoke up, his quiet voice somehow more commanding for its softness. "She'll have friends in Helena." The implied message was clear. Garrett's face flushed darker, but he controlled his obvious anger. "How quickly you've acquired friends, Miss Owens," he said with a thin smile. "One might wonder about the nature of such hasty alliances." Katherine felt her cheeks burn at the insinuation, but Owen's expression remained impassive. "One might also wonder about the nature of accidents that conveniently eliminate business obstacles," he replied evenly, holding Garrett's gaze. A tense silence fell over the table. Brooks cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should discuss business details tomorrow at my office. 9 o'clock. That would be suitable," Katherine agreed, grateful for the interruption. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, it's been a long journey. I should retire." Owen stood as she rose. "I'll see you to your room." Outside the dining room, Katherine released a shaky breath. "That man is odious and dangerous," Owen added quietly. "Be careful around him, Katherine. Garrett's not accustomed to being thwarted." "Do you truly believe he might have had something to do with my uncle's death?" she asked, lowering her voice. Owen's expression was grim. "I've known men like Garrett all my life. They take what they want and remove whatever stands in their way." "Can't prove anything about your uncle, but the timing is convenient." "What did you mean, about me not facing challenges alone?" Katherine asked as they reached her room. Owen hesitated. "Meant what I said. You'll have friends here. People respected your uncle. They'll give you a fair chance." He paused. "I have business in town for a few weeks, if you need anything." The offer hung between them, sincere but undefined. Katherine found herself studying his face in the dim hallway light, struck again by the quiet strength in his features. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, an emotion Katherine couldn't quite name. Then he nodded briefly, touching the brim of his hat. "Sleep well, Katherine. I'll accompany you to Brooks' office in the morning." Katherine lay awake long after retiring, her mind churning with the day's events. In just 2 days, her understanding of her future had shifted dramatically. The mercantile business she had imagined taking over smoothly now seemed fraught with potential danger. Harrison Garrett clearly would not relinquish his ambitions easily, and the hint of foul play in her uncle's death left her deeply unsettled. Yet alongside these concerns, her thoughts repeatedly returned to Owen Sutherland. He was unlike any man she had ever known, straightforward, capable, with none of the polished artifice she was accustomed to in Boston society. His offer of friendship seemed genuine, with no apparent motive beyond basic decency, or was there something more? Katherine recalled the moment in the hallway, the indefinable look in his eyes. Surely she was imagining things, creating romantic notions where none existed. Owen had simply helped a person in need, as any decent man would. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, it was his face that followed her into dreams. Morning brought renewed determination. Katherine dressed in her most businesslike traveling outfit, a navy blue skirt and jacket over a crisp white shirtwaist. Her hair she arranged in a simple chignon, practical yet dignified. She was representing her family's interests now, and appearances mattered. Owen was waiting in the hotel lobby, engaged in conversation with a tall, silver-haired man in a marshal's badge. They both looked up as Katherine descended the stairs. "Miss Owens," Owen said with formal courtesy, though his eyes held a warmer greeting. "This is Marshal James Cooper, Marshal Miss Katherine Owens." "Madam," Cooper said, tipping his hat. "Sutherland here was just telling me about your arrival in town. Sounds like you had quite an adventure crossing the Yellowstone." "Mr. Sutherland is too modest about his role in that adventure," Katherine replied. "Without his intervention, I would certainly have drowned." Cooper nodded thoughtfully. Lucky thing he was tracking those Mustangs nearby. His shrewd eyes studied her. "Your uncle was well liked in Helena, Miss Owens. His passing was a real loss to the community." "I'm beginning to understand that," Katherine said. "I hope to continue his legacy at the mercantile." "Garrett giving you trouble about that?" Cooper asked bluntly. Katherine was surprised by the direct question. "Mr. Garrett seems to believe he has some claim to my uncle's business, MMM." Cooper's noncommittal sound spoke volumes. "Well, law's on your side from what Brooks tells me, but if you have any concerns, my office is just down the street. Doors always open." The implicit support was encouraging. Perhaps Owen was right about having friends in Helena after all. Brooks' office was a small, book-lined room above the town's only bank. The solicitor welcomed them with obvious relief that Garrett had not yet arrived. "I've prepared all the necessary documents," he explained, spreading papers across his desk. "Once signed, you'll have full legal ownership of the mercantile, its inventory, and the attached living quarters. There's also a small sum in the bank, your uncle's personal savings." Katherine reviewed the documents carefully. Everything appeared in order, confirming her inheritance exactly as her uncle's letters had described. "And Mr. Garrett's claims?" she asked. Brooks sighed. "Mostly bluster. He invested in some inventory over the years, but your uncle repaid those investments with interest." "Everything was properly documented." He hesitated. "However, Garrett does wield considerable influence in town. He owns the saloon down the street, has interests in several mining claims," and he broke off as footsteps sounded on the stairs. The door opened without a knock, and Harrison Garrett entered as if he owned the place. This morning he was accompanied by a younger man with similar features, a son or nephew perhaps. "Brooks, Miss Owens," he acknowledged, ignoring Owen completely. "I trust we're here to discuss a reasonable arrangement regarding the mercantile." "We're here to complete the transfer of ownership to Miss Owens, as specified in Jeremiah's will," Brooks corrected, with more backbone than Katherine had expected. Garrett's face hardened. "I've been patient, but this farce has gone on long enough. Jeremiah and I had an agreement not in writing and not witnessed," Brooks interrupted. "I've explained this repeatedly, Mr. Garrett. The law is clear." "The law," Garrett scoffed. "Out here, practicality matters more than legal technicalities." How long do you think a woman alone can run a business in Helena? A week, a month, the first time ruffians decide to make trouble or suppliers refuse to deliver. Are you threatening Miss Owens? Owen asked quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Garrett turned to him with a dismissive glance. Simply stating facts, Sutherland. This isn't your concern. I'm making it my concern, Owen replied, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. The younger man with Garrett shifted his stance, his hand drifting toward his hip. Owen didn't move, but something in his posture changed subtly, a coiled readiness that made Catherine's breath catch. Brooks cleared his throat nervously. Gentlemen, please, this is a legal matter, not cause for altercations. Katherine placed her hand on the documents. Mr. Brooks is correct, and as the legal owner of Owens Mercantile, I'm signing these papers today. She met Garrett's gaze steadily. I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Mr. Garrett, but I assure you I'm quite capable of managing my inheritance. For a moment, Garrett's mask of civility slipped, revealing naked anger beneath. Then, with visible effort, he controlled his expression. As you wish, Miss Owens. But my offer to purchase the business remains open when you inevitably reconsider. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and you might want to inspect the merchandise carefully. I hear there have been some inventory issues recently. After Garrett and his companion departed, Brooks sagged in his chair. That man, he muttered, has been nothing but trouble since Jeremiah's passing. What did he mean about inventory issues? Katherine asked. Brooks looked uncomfortable. There have been some incidents at the store. Minor thefts, vandalism, nothing that can be proven, of course. Intimidation tactics, Owen said grimly. Katherine finished signing the documents with a firm hand, refusing to be cowed. Then we should inspect the store immediately. I intend to open for business tomorrow. The mercantile stood exactly as Katherine had imagined it from her uncle's descriptions. A substantial two-story building with a wide storefront and large display windows. The painted sign proclaiming Owens Mercantile hung slightly askew, and one window had been recently repaired, but otherwise the exterior looked well maintained. Brooks produced a large brass key. The living quarters are upstairs, 3 rooms and a small kitchen. Your uncle lived quite comfortably. Katherine felt a pang of sadness as she entered the store her uncle had built. She had met Jeremiah Owens only twice as a child, but had corresponded with him regularly after reaching adulthood. His letters had been full of stories about frontier life and his pride in establishing a respected business in the growing town. The interior of the mercantile was dusty from weeks of limited use, but otherwise orderly. Shelves lined the walls, filled with everything from basic staples to tools, clothing, and household goods. A long counter ran along one side with a cash register and account books neatly arranged. Your uncle employed a young man to help with stocking and deliveries, Brooks explained. Timothy Larson, good worker, honest. He's been opening the store for limited hours since. He trailed off since my uncle's death, Katherine finished. I'd like to meet him. He usually comes in around noon, Brooks said. I should return to my office, but if you need anything further. Katherine thanked him, and once he departed, she began a methodical inspection of the store. Owen moved quietly with her, occasionally asking questions about inventory or commenting on the quality of goods. Your uncle knew his business, he observed. These are good wares, fairly priced from what I can see. Katherine ran her hand over a shelf of fabric bolts. He built something meaningful here. I can't let Garrett take it away. Owen studied her face. It won't be easy. Garrett won't give up, and running this place takes knowledge you don't yet have. Then I'll learn, Katherine said simply. I'm not afraid of hard work, Owen. Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. No, I don't suppose you are. They were interrupted by the arrival of Timothy Larson, a lanky youth of about 19 with an open, freckled face. He stopped short at the sight of Katherine, then broke into a wide smile. Miss Owens, you made it. Mr. Brooks said you were coming, but then when you were delayed. He thrust out his hand enthusiastically. Tim Larson, madam, your uncle was the best boss a fellow could ask for. Katherine liked him immediately. It's a pleasure to meet you, Tim. I hope you'll continue working here. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Tim assured her. His expression sobered. Mr. Owens was good to me, gave me a chance when nobody else would. Whatever you need, Miss Owens, I'm your man. I'm glad to hear it, Katherine said warmly, because I'll need your help to reopen properly tomorrow. Tim's eyes widened. Tomorrow, but… What about Mr. Garrett? He's been saying, Mr. Garrett's opinions are of no concern to me, Katherine interrupted firmly. This is Owen's mercantile, and it will remain so. Tim glanced at Owen, who had remained silent during the exchange. Mr. Sutherland. Didn't expect to see you in town this time of year. Just passing through, Owen replied. Thought I'd help Miss Owens get settled. Tim nodded, clearly reassured by Owen's presence. Well, we'd better get to work then. Store needs a good cleaning, and I should show you the ordering system Mr. Owens used. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Katherine threw herself into learning every aspect of the business. From the organization of merchandise to the credit system her uncle had established for trusted customers. Tim proved invaluable, patiently explaining procedures and introducing her to the few customers who ventured in when they saw activity inside the store. Owen remained as well, saying little but observing everything. He helped with the heavier work without being asked, moving crates, repairing a broken shelf, securing the back door which showed signs of tampering. His quiet competence was reassuring, though Katherine found herself increasingly aware of his presence in a way that had nothing to do with security concerns. By late afternoon, the store was clean, reorganized, and ready to open officially the next day. Katherine's muscles ached from unaccustomed physical labor, but satisfaction outweighed fatigue. We should celebrate, she declared impulsively. Tim, would you join us for supper at the hotel? My treat to thank you for your help today, Tim beamed. That'd be swell, Miss Owens. Just let me wash up a bit. As Tim hurried to the back room, Katherine turned to Owen. And you, will you join us? Owen hesitated. Better not. Need to check on some business at the livery stable before dark. Disappointment washed over Katherine, stronger than she would have expected. Oh. Of course, you've already given us so much of your time. Nothing to do with time, Owen said quietly, but people talk in small towns. Being seen dining with you 2 nights in a row, understanding dawned. My reputation, Katherine said, half amused, half touched by his consideration. Owen nodded seriously. You're establishing yourself as a businesswoman, don't need complications. The word hung between them, complications. Was that what he considered himself? Or rather, what might develop between them if they continued in each other's company? Perhaps you're right, Katherine conceded, though part of her wanted to argue that she didn't care about town gossip, but she knew better. In a frontier community, reputation could mean the difference between success and failure for her business. I'll stop by tomorrow, Owen promised. Just to make sure everything's going smoothly. After he left, Katherine climbed the stairs to inspect her new living quarters. The rooms were simply but comfortably furnished, with her uncle's personal touches still evident: books on shelves, a collection of unusual rocks displayed on a side table, a worn armchair positioned to catch the evening light through west-facing windows. It was here, standing in her uncle's private space, that the reality of his absence finally struck her fully. Tears welled unexpectedly as she picked up a framed photograph of a much younger Jeremiah standing proudly in front of his newly opened store. "I'll make you proud, Uncle," she whispered. "I promise." Opening day dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring morning in the Montana Territory. Katherine dressed carefully in a practical but becoming blue dress with a white collar, arranging her hair neatly but not too formally. She wanted to project capability and professionalism without appearing unapproachable. Tim arrived early, full of enthusiasm and helpful suggestions. "Saturday's always busy," he explained. "Ranchers and their families come to town for supplies." Mr. Owens used to put penny candy by the register for the children. Katherine smiled at his eagerness. "An excellent tradition to continue. We'll set it up right away." By the time she unlocked the front door at 8 o'clock, a small gathering had already formed outside, curious townspeople eager to see Jeremiah Owens' Eastern niece and assess, whether she was equal to the task of running the mercantile. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, transactions, and countless questions about Boston. Katherine found the people of Helena generally welcoming, if cautiously so. Many expressed their condolences for her uncle's passing and their pleasure that the store would continue under family ownership. "Garrett's been telling everyone you'd sell out to him within a week," confided Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, as Katherine wrapped her purchases. "Said a refined Eastern lady wouldn't last a day in a frontier store. Mr. Garrett seems to have many opinions about my capabilities," Katherine replied diplomatically. "I hope to prove some of them mistaken." By midday, the store was consistently busy. Tim handled deliveries and the heavier items, while Katherine managed the register and assisted female customers with fabric and household selections. She found herself genuinely enjoying the work, the human interactions, the satisfaction of providing needed goods, the challenge of keeping track of multiple tasks simultaneously. Owen arrived shortly after noon, Wolf waiting patiently outside. He moved through the crowded store quietly, observing the operations with evident approval. "You seem to have found your footing," he commented when he reached the counter. "Store's busier than I've seen it in months." Katherine smiled, pleasure warming her at his words. Curiosity, mostly. "Everyone wants to see if the Boston lady will faint at the sight of rough miners or burst into tears over the account books." "And have you?" Owen asked, a rare hint of teasing in his voice. "Not yet, though Mr. Simmons did track mud across the entire store," Katherine replied lightly. "I considered swooning but decided it would interfere with business." Owen's laugh, rich and unexpected, drew glances from nearby customers. The sound transformed his features, erasing years of weathering and reserve. Katherine found herself staring, captivated by this glimpse of the man beneath the stoic exterior. The moment was broken by a commotion at the door. Harrison Garrett entered, flanked by the same young man who had accompanied him to Brooks' office. Conversation quieted as he made his way toward the counter. "Miss Owens," he greeted with exaggerated politeness. "I see you've managed to open after all, commendable if perhaps premature." "Not at all, Mr. Garrett," Katherine replied evenly. "The mercantile is well stocked and ready for business. As you can see, our customers agree." Garrett's gaze shifted to Owen, his expression hardening. "Still playing protector, Sutherland, how chivalrous." "Just doing some shopping," Owen replied mildly. "Need coffee and ammunition." "Of course." Garrett turned his attention back to Katherine. "I merely stopped by to see if you'd reconsidered my offer. The burden of running such an establishment, inventory, suppliers, banking, it's considerable. My offer would provide you a comfortable return to Boston with no further concerns." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "My answer remains the same, Mr. Garrett. The mercantile is not for sale." Something ugly flashed in Garrett's eyes before he controlled it. "As you wish, for now." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good day, Miss Owens." After he departed, the store buzzed with whispered conversations. Katherine realized that the confrontation had been witnessed by nearly everyone present exactly as Garrett had intended. He was establishing battle lines publicly, forcing her to either stand firm or retreat. "He's not done," Owen said quietly. "That was just for show." Katherine nodded. "I know, but neither am I." The next several days fell into a pattern. Katherine threw herself into learning every aspect of the mercantile business, from inventory management to negotiating with suppliers. Tim proved invaluable, showing her the systems her uncle had established and introducing her to trusted vendors and customers. Owen stopped by daily, ostensibly to purchase supplies or check on Wolf, who had taken to lying outside the store's front door as if appointed guardian. Katherine found herself looking forward to these visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and unsettled her. They spoke of practical matters, mostly the business, local customs, people she should know in town. But occasionally, in quiet moments, their conversations drifted to more personal topics. She learned that Owen had left Pennsylvania at 19 after his parents died, worked his way west on cattle drives, and eventually found his place in the Montana Territory, breaking horses and living off the land. In turn, she told him about her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her father's accounting firm where she had secretly learned business practices while officially serving as a hostess for client meetings, and her determination to prove herself capable of independence. "My parents were scandalized when I announced I was coming west," she admitted one evening as they sat on the small balcony outside her living quarters. "Mother predicted I'd be murdered by Indians or die of exposure within a week." Owen smiled slightly. "Well, the drowning was a close call." Katherine laughed. "Yes, not the best start to proving my self-sufficiency." "Why did you really come?" Owen asked, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. "Inheriting a business explains the journey, but not the determination. You could have sold to Garrett from Boston, lived comfortably on the proceeds." Katherine considered the question seriously. "I suppose I needed to prove to myself more than anyone that I'm capable of more than pouring tea and making polite conversation. In Boston, a woman of my background has one acceptable path: advantageous marriage, children, social obligations. I wanted something more." "And have you found it?" Owen's gaze held hers. Katherine looked out over the town, the mountains beyond painted gold and purple in the sunset. "I believe I'm beginning to." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Wolf whined softly from his position near the door, breaking the spell. Owen cleared his throat. "Getting dark, should head back to the hotel." Katherine nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes, of course." "Thank you for your company." As she watched him descend the outside stairs, Katherine acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Owen Sutherland, a man as different from the suitors her parents had approved as the wild Montana landscape was from Boston's manicured gardens. The realization should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt like recognizing something she had always known. The following week brought new challenges. Two suppliers who had reliably served her uncle suddenly claimed they couldn't fulfill orders due to inventory shortages. A scheduled delivery of winter clothing arrived soaked despite clear weather, as if it had been deliberately doused. And most worrying, Tim reported being followed and threatened by Garrett's son, Victor, with warnings to find other employment while he still could. Katherine maintained a brave face publicly, but privately, her concern grew. Garrett was systematically attempting to undermine her business, using his influence to pressure suppliers and create difficulties too subtle to take to the marshal. "He's testing you," Owen said when she confided these troubles during one of his visits. "Seeing how much pressure it takes before you give in." "I won't give him the satisfaction," Katherine insisted, "but I can't ignore the practical problems these coincidences are creating." Owen was silent for a moment, his expression troubled. "There might be another option. I know some suppliers in Virginia City who aren't beholden to Garrett, would take longer for deliveries, but they're reliable." "That would help enormously," Katherine said gratefully. "But wouldn't it require someone to travel there? It's at least 3 days' ride each way." Owen nodded. "I'd go myself, but—" He hesitated. "Don't like leaving you alone with Garrett circling." The concern in his voice warmed her even as she squared her shoulders. "I'm not alone. I have Tim. Marshal Cooper checks in regularly, and half the town is watching this drama unfold." "Garrett won't try anything too obvious." Owen didn't look convinced. "Man like that gets desperate when his plans are thwarted, and Victor's got a nasty temper without his father's calculation to temper it." "All the more reason to secure alternative suppliers," Katherine argued. "We need to show Garrett that his tactics won't succeed." In the end, Owen agreed to make the journey to Virginia City, though his reluctance was evident. 3 days there, 2 days for business, 3 back, he calculated, assuming no complications. "We'll manage," Katherine assured him, trying to project more confidence than she felt. In truth, the prospect of 8 days without Owen's steadying presence left her uneasy, but she refused to let fear dictate her decisions. The morning of Owen's departure dawned gray and drizzly. He stopped by the mercantile before heading out, Wolf at his heels as always. "Sure you'll be all right?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Katherine nodded. "Perfectly." Tim's sleeping in the storeroom as an extra precaution, and Marshal Cooper promised to keep an eye on things. Owen seemed about to say something more, then changed his mind. "I'll be back as soon as I can." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with words unspoken. Katherine felt the weight of them in her chest, feelings that had grown steadily since that fateful day at the river crossing. "Owen," she began, not entirely sure what she intended to say. He met her gaze, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Then, with a decisiveness that took her by surprise, he stepped forward, one hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Been trying to keep my distance," he said softly, "telling myself you belong to a different world, but Katherine—" His voice roughened. "I can't stop thinking about you." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. For a moment, time suspended between them. Then Owen lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, his touch reverent. When they separated, Owen's eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "That wasn't part of my plans," he admitted, a hint of rueful humor in his voice. "Nor mine," Katherine replied, still breathless, "but I'm not sorry." Owen's expression grew serious again. "I'm not the kind of man your family would approve of, Katherine. I have nothing to offer but a small cabin and a life that's harder than anything you've known." "Perhaps you should let me decide what I value," Katherine said softly. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment. Owen stepped back, though his eyes still held hers. "We'll talk when I return," he promised. Katherine nodded, her heart too full for words. After Owen departed, Katherine threw herself into work with renewed energy, determined to keep the mercantile running smoothly until his return. Tim proved more capable than she'd initially realized, taking on additional responsibilities without complaint and showing a keen mind for business. 3 days passed without incident. Then, on the 4th morning, Katherine arrived at the store to find the front window shattered and merchandise scattered across the floor. "Must have happened late last night," Tim said grimly as they surveyed the damage. "I heard something around midnight but thought it was just drunks from the saloon. By the time I checked, whoever did it was gone." Marshal Cooper arrived minutes later, his expression grim as he examined the broken glass and overturned shelves. "This is escalating," he said. "First the suppliers, now vandalism. It's Garrett," Katherine said with certainty. "But you can't prove it, can you?" Cooper sighed. "Not unless someone saw him or his boy do it, but everyone knows." "Knowing isn't enough," Katherine said bitterly. "Meanwhile, I have a broken window and damaged goods." "I'll send the glazier over," Cooper promised, "and I'll have a deputy keep watch tonight. This kind of thing happens again, we might catch someone in the act." With Tim's help, Katherine cleaned up the mess and reopened by mid-morning. The broken window, temporarily boarded up, served as a visible reminder of the forces aligned against her. Yet rather than deterring customers, the incident seemed to rally support. Several townspeople stopped by specifically to make purchases and express their disapproval of the vandalism. "Garrett's overplayed his hand," Mrs. Peterson observed as she paid for her purchases. "People don't like bullies, especially when they target a woman trying to honor her family's legacy." The glazier arrived that afternoon to repair the window, refusing payment with a gruff, "Put it on Jeremiah's tab. Man helped me when I was starting out. Least I can do." These small kindnesses bolstered Katherine's spirits, reminding her that, for all Garrett's influence, he wasn't universally admired in Helena. Still, she couldn't shake her uneasiness as night fell. Tim insisted on sleeping in the store again, and Cooper's deputy maintained a visible presence on the street, but Katherine felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. She missed Owen with an intensity that surprised her. It wasn't just his physical protection she longed for, but his steady presence, his quiet confidence, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words mattered. The kiss they had shared played in her memory throughout the day. It had been her first fact that would have scandalized her mother, yet it had felt so right, so natural, as if some part of her had been waiting for precisely that moment. The following morning brought unexpected visitors, Harrison and Victor Garrett, arriving just as Katherine opened the store. Miss Owens, Garrett greeted her with false concern. I was distressed to hear about the unfortunate incident with your window. Such a dangerous town for a woman alone. Katherine met his gaze steadily. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Garrett, but as you can see, the damage has been repaired. We're fully open for business. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Admirable perseverance. However, I wonder if you've truly considered the risks you're taking. Frontier towns can be unpredictable. Fires, for instance, are a constant danger to wooden structures. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Katherine felt cold anger replace her fear. Are you threatening me, Mr. Garrett? She asked, her voice perfectly controlled. Merely observing the realities of our environment, Garrett replied smoothly. My offer to purchase the mercantile still stands. In fact, given recent events, I'm prepared to increase it by 10%, a generous sum that would allow you to return to Boston in comfort. The mercantile is not for sale, Katherine said firmly. Not now, not ever. Victor Garrett stepped forward, his expression ugly. You're making a mistake, lady. Nobody refuses my father. Victor, Garrett cautioned, placing a restraining hand on his son's arm. Miss Owens is entitled to her decision, misguided though it may be. He turned back to Katherine. Consider carefully, my dear. Your position here is precarious. Sutherland won't always be around to protect you. After they left, Katherine's hands trembled as she straightened merchandise that didn't need arranging. The threat had been clear, despite Garrett's careful phrasing. We should tell the marshal, Tim urged when she related the conversation. Katherine shook her head. And say what? That Garrett made vague comments about fire hazards. Cooper already knows he's behind the vandalism but can't prove it. This would be even harder to substantiate. They took extra precautions nonetheless. Tim filled buckets with water and positioned them strategically around the store. Katherine wrote a detailed account of Garrett's visit and sealed it in an envelope, giving it to Mrs. Peterson for safekeeping. Just in case, she explained to the baker's wife, who nodded grimly. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation, but no further incidents occurred. Katherine began to hope that Garrett had reconsidered his tactics, especially as Cooper had increased patrols past the mercantile. Owen was due back the following day. Katherine found herself watching the street anxiously, hoping for a glimpse of him and Wolf returning early. But as evening approached with no sign of him, she resigned herself to one more night alone. She was closing the store when Tim burst in through the back door, his face flushed with exertion. Miss Owens, you need to come quick. It's Victor Garrett. He's at the saloon, drunk as a skunk and telling everyone he's going to teach the Boston lady a lesson she won't forget tonight. Katherine's blood ran cold. Did you tell the marshal? Tim nodded frantically. He's gone to the saloon now, but Victor already left. Miss Owens, I think he means to burn the store. Katherine made a split-second decision. Go back to the marshal. Tell him we need help here immediately. I'll lock up. As Tim raced out, Katherine quickly secured the cash in the safe and gathered the most important documents, deeds, inventory lists, supplier contacts. These she placed in a leather satchel, along with a small Derringer pistol her uncle had kept beneath the counter. She had just finished when she heard a noise from the alley behind the store. Gripping the Derringer, Katherine moved cautiously toward the back door. Through the small window, she could make out a shadowy figure pouring liquid around the base of the building. Heart pounding, she eased the door open slightly. Stop right there, she called, pointing the Derringer with a hand she forced to remain steady. Victor Garrett spun around, a kerosene can in one hand and a matchbox in the other. His face, illuminated by the light spilling from the doorway, showed surprise followed by ugly amusement. Well, if it isn't the Boston lady herself, he slurred. Come to watch the show. Put those down and leave, Katherine commanded. The marshal is on his way. Victor laughed. By the time he gets here, this place will be ashes. Then maybe you'll understand that when Harrison Garrett wants something, he gets it. Your father won't thank you for this, Katherine said, trying to reason with him. Arson is a hanging offense. Nobody will prove anything, Victor sneered, striking a match. Just another unfortunate accident in a frontier town. Katherine aimed the Derringer. I will shoot you if I must. Victor hesitated, eyeing the small pistol. You won't pull that trigger. Eastern ladies don't have the stomach for it. Try me, Katherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. For a long moment, they stood frozen in tableau, Katherine in the doorway with the derringer, Victor with his match burning down toward his fingers. Then several things happened at once. Victor cursed as the match burned his fingers, dropping it onto the kerosene-soaked ground. Flames erupted instantly, spreading along the trail of fuel. Katherine fired the derringer, the shot going wide as Victor lunged toward her. And from the darkness behind Victor came a snarling gray blur as Wolf launched himself at the young man, teeth closing around his arm. Victor screamed, dropping the kerosene can as he tried to fend off the attacking animal. Wolf, hold. Owen's voice cut through the chaos as he emerged from the shadows, rifle in hand. The dog immediately stopped his attack but continued growling, keeping Victor pinned against the wall of the adjacent building. The flames were spreading quickly along the back wall of the mercantile. Katherine. Owen shouted, "The water buckets!" Katherine was already moving, dragging the nearest bucket to the door and flinging its contents onto the growing fire. Owen grabbed another, doing the same. Tim appeared moments later with the marshal and several townsmen, all joining the bucket brigade. The fire was extinguished before it could take serious hold, though the back wall was scorched and damaged. Victor Garrett, his arm bleeding from Wolf's bite, was taken into custody by Marshal Cooper. Attempted arson, Cooper said grimly, witnessed by multiple people. Not even his father can get him out of this one. Katherine sagged against the doorframe, the spent derringer still clutched in her hand. Owen approached cautiously, his face streaked with soot but his eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Katherine shook her head. "No, you're back early." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "Finished my business quicker than expected." "Good thing, too," he glanced at the derringer. "Were you really going to shoot him?" Katherine considered the question honestly. "I don't know, I hope I wouldn't have needed to find out." Owen's expression softened. "Brave woman," he murmured, touching her cheek gently. "Too brave for your own good sometimes." The aftermath of Victor Garrett's arrest threw Helena into an uproar. Harrison Garrett protested his son's innocence vehemently, claiming Victor had been framed. But with multiple witnesses, including Marshal Cooper himself, the case was irrefutable. To Katherine's surprise, Garrett appeared at the mercantile the following day, his usual bluster replaced by a grim resignation. "My son will hang for this," he said without preamble. Katherine shook her head. "That's not what I want, Mr. Garrett. Justice, yes, but not a young man's life." Garrett studied her with narrowed eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'll speak to Judge Hollister when he arrives next week. Ask for leniency in sentencing if Victor agrees to leave the territory and never return, and if you agree to cease all attempts to acquire this store." Garrett's expression showed surprise followed by calculation. "Why would you show such mercy?" "Because unlike you, Mr. Garrett, I don't believe in destroying lives to get what I want," Katherine replied evenly. "Victor is young and foolish, but he's your son. I'd rather see him get a second chance far from here than see him hang." For the first time since she'd met him, Harrison Garrett seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he nodded. "I'll consider your offer. But understand this: if I agree, our business in this town is concluded. I won't trouble you again, but neither will I assist you." "That's all I ask," Katherine said simply. After Garrett left, Owen emerged from the back room where he'd been repairing the fire damage. "You heard?" Katherine asked. Owen nodded. "Think he'll take the deal?" "If he loves his son, yes," Katherine said. "For all his faults, I believe he does." Owen studied her face. "You're a remarkable woman, Katherine Owens. Most people in your position would want revenge." "What would that accomplish?" Katherine asked. "More bitterness, more hatred." "I want to build something here, not destroy." Owen's expression softened. "And will you stay and build, I mean?" Katherine met his gaze steadily. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay beyond the mercantile," she said softly. Owen moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Before I left for Virginia City, I told you we'd talk when I returned. Seems we got distracted by the fire." Katherine smiled. "A minor interruption." "Katherine," Owen said, his voice serious now. "I meant what I said then. I have little to offer a woman like you, Owen Sutherland, Katherine interrupted, squeezing his hands. In the past weeks, you've shown me more kindness, more integrity, and more true strength than any man I've ever known. If you're about to suggest you're not worthy of me because you don't have a Boston mansion or a banking fortune, I may have to reconsider my opinion of your intelligence. A slow smile spread across Owen's face, transforming his weathered features. Is that so? It is, Katherine confirmed. I came west seeking independence, seeking to prove myself capable of managing on my own. I've done that, I think, but I've found something else I wasn't looking for. What's that? Owen asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Love, Katherine said simply. I've fallen in love with this wild country, with this town despite its challenges, and most unexpected of all, with a quiet horseman who saved me from drowning and then saved my heart from a life half-lived. Owen drew her closer. I love you, Katherine Owens. Have from the moment I pulled you from that river, though it took me time to admit it to myself. His kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, filled with promise. Katherine melted into it, her arms twining around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally separated, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I don't expect you to live in my cabin in the wilderness, he said. No, you have the store here, responsibilities. We'll figure it out, Katherine assured him. Perhaps a compromise, the store during the week, your cabin on weekends, until we decide on something more permanent. Owen's eyes lit with hope. You'd consider that, living between two worlds, Owen, Katherine said gently. I've been living between worlds since I arrived in Montana. The woman I was in Boston and the woman I'm becoming here, they're both part of me. Just as the horseman of the wilderness and the man who's been helping me manage inventory and negotiate with suppliers are both parts of you, Owen chuckled. Never thought I'd find spreadsheets interesting. See. We're already changing each other, Katherine teased. More seriously, she added, I don't want to change who you are fundamentally. I fell in love with you as you are. And I with you, Owen replied. Though I might need some polishing before meeting your Boston family, Katherine laughed. They'll adore you, eventually, once they recover from the shock. Judge Hollister arrived the following week. True to her word, Katherine testified in favor of leniency for Victor Garrett in exchange for his permanent departure from the territory. Harrison Garrett, seeing the opportunity to save his son from the gallows, agreed to all conditions, including relinquishing any claim on the mercantile. Never thought I'd see Garrett back down, Marshal Cooper commented after the hearing. You've managed something remarkable, Miss Owens. Sometimes mercy accomplishes what force cannot, Katherine replied, though I doubt Mr. Garrett and I will ever be friends. Some people aren't worth befriending, Cooper said bluntly, but you've made plenty of other friends in Helena. People respect how you've handled yourself through all this. It was true. In the weeks following the fire, Katherine had found herself increasingly accepted by the townsfolk. The mercantile was thriving, with new customers arriving daily. The alternative suppliers Owen had arranged in Virginia City proved reliable. And slowly, local vendors who had bowed to Garrett's pressure began returning as well. 2 months after her near drowning in the Yellowstone, Katherine stood beside Owen on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Wolf lay at their feet, content in the evening quiet. I spoke with Tim today, Katherine said, leaning against Owen's shoulder. Offered him a partnership in the mercantile, 10% to start, with the opportunity to increase his share over time. Owen smiled. Good decision. Boy has a head for business, been a loyal friend to you too. He has, Katherine agreed, and it will allow me more flexibility to be here with you, she hesitated, if that's still what you want. Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. What I want, he said deliberately, is to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. Whether that's here in town or somewhere in between doesn't much matter to me, Katherine's heart swelled. Are you proposing, Mr. Sutherland? Inelegantly, perhaps, Owen admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, Miss Owens, I am asking if you would do me the very great honor of becoming my wife. Catherine's answer was in her kiss, fierce, loving, and absolutely certain. When they finally separated, she said, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Owen reached into his pocket, producing a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "Belonged to my mother," he explained. "Been carrying it since I returned from Virginia City, waiting for the right moment." As he slipped it onto her finger, Katherine felt tears of joy blurring her vision. "It's perfect," she whispered. They were married that autumn in a simple ceremony beside the Yellowstone River, at the very spot where Owen had pulled Katherine from the churning waters. Marshal Cooper stood as witness, along with Tim and several friends from Helena. Wolf served as unofficial ring-bearer, the bands tied carefully to his collar. Katherine wore a gown of ivory satin ordered specially from St. Louis, while Owen surprised her by appearing in a new suit, his hair trimmed and his face freshly shaven. They spoke their vows against a backdrop of golden aspens and the eternal mountains, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever adventures lay ahead. "I never expected to find you," Katherine said, her voice clear in the autumn air. "But now I can't imagine a life without you in it." "You fell from a horse into a river," Owen replied with tender humor, "and straight into my heart. Some might call it an accident, I call it destiny." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the river flowed on beside them, powerful, unpredictable, and eternally changing, much like the love they had found on its banks. 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Owen taught their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah, to ride her first pony. The little girl's laughter echoed across the meadow, her chestnut hair so like her mother's gleaming in the summer sunshine. Beside Katherine, Wolf lay dozing, gray now around his muzzle but still vigilant when it came to protecting the family. At her feet, 1-year-old James crawled determinedly toward the steps, only to be scooped up by his mother before he could embark on an unauthorized adventure. "Just like your papa," Katherine told him, settling the squirming boy on her hip. "Always seeking the next horizon." The mercantile continued to thrive under Tim's day-to-day management, with Katherine overseeing the accounts and larger business decisions. She and Owen had built a small second home behind the store for use during their frequent visits to town, creating a life that balanced the freedom of the wilderness with the community they'd found in Helena. Owen finished the riding lesson and lifted Sarah from the pony, swinging her high in the air before setting her down to run toward the cabin. As he approached, Katherine felt the same rush of love that had overwhelmed her that day by the river crossing. His face was more weathered now, with new lines around his eyes, but those eyes still held the same steadfast devotion when they looked at her. "How are my favorite people?" he asked, kissing Katherine and ruffling James's dark hair. "Eagerly awaiting supper time," Katherine replied with a smile. "Sarah wants to hear the river story again." Owen groaned good-naturedly. "Again, she's heard it 100 times. And will probably want to hear it 100 more," Katherine said. "It's her favorite, the brave cowboy rescuing the lady from the rushing waters." "The lady who rescued the cowboy right back," Owen corrected, drawing her close despite the squirming toddler between them. "From a life of solitude that I didn't even realize was incomplete." As the sun began to set behind the mountains they both loved, Katherine leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the family they had created together. From that fateful river crossing to this peaceful moment, their journey had been one of discovery, challenge, and abiding love, a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky stretching endlessly above them.